The 1970s didn't just reshape horror, it turned it inside out, splashing the darkest parts of humanity across silver screens worldwide. While everyone knows The Exorcist and Halloween, a shadow gallery exists of films so shocking, authorities yanked them mid-run. Religious groups picketed. Theaters received threats. Tonight, we're diving into the forbidden zone of 13 horror films that got ripped from theaters for being too damn disturbing. 1. The Exorcist, 1973. William Friedkin's demonic masterpiece didn't just scare audiences, it shattered entire communities. When those theater doors opened in 1973, nobody was prepared for what waited inside. Lines stretched around blocks while paramedics stood by for fainting viewers. This wasn't entertainment, it was a cultural earthquake. In Mississippi, theater staff were actually arrested after the first showing. The obscenity conviction was later overturned, but the message was clear. Some thought this film was literally criminal. Boston officials attempted to block screenings entirely before courts stepped in. Even then, theaters couldn't admit minors. Across the Atlantic, UK religious groups pushed local councils to pre-screen the film, with many areas banning it outright. The film's power to disturb followed it right into living rooms. After the Video Recordings Act, British regulators forced The Exorcist off UK shelves for over a decade. Friedkin had created something that transcended simple horror, a courtroom drama of faith that made viewers question their beliefs while watching a child's body become a battlefield between good and evil. The New York Daily News called it the most frightening film ever made, while religious leaders condemned it as blasphemous. All the controversy did was fuel ticket sales, turning a film that theaters tried to bury into one of the highest-grossing horror films of all time. 2. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Tobe Hooper's sun-drenched nightmare arrived with the raw impact of a sledgehammer to the skull. What's bizarre about the outrage is how little graphic violence the film actually shows. It's all implied, but the documentary-style filming made viewers believe they had witnessed actual atrocities. The British Board of Film Classification refused national certification, effectively blocking mainstream distribution. Local UK councils occasionally allowed limited screenings, but the prevailing message was clear: too intense for public exhibition. In America, theaters canceled bookings after viewer complaints flooded in. The film's title itself became so notorious that imitators were cautioned against even using the word chainsaw in their marketing. Critics were divided. Roger Ebert praised its horrible effectiveness, while others labeled it despicable. What nobody could deny was its primal power. The sound of that generator, Leatherface's dance in the Texas sunset, the final shots of madness unleashed. The most disturbing thing about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just what happened on screen. It was how the film reflected America's post-Vietnam anxieties and the collapse of rural myths. Theaters that pulled it created the ultimate forbidden fruit, transforming a low-budget shocker into a rite of passage whispered about for generations. Ironically, the ban's only cemented its legacy. The BBFC finally relented in 1999, allowing uncut screenings 25 years after the damage was done. 3. Snuff, 1976. Exploitation creators. Michael and Roberta Findlay had a wicked marketing idea: sell their cheap thriller as if it contained actual murder. Originally shot as Slaughter in Argentina, the film was recut with a new ending that pretended to show a camera operator killing a woman after the official movie ended. The hoax was diabolically effective. Women's groups erupted in protests, arguing the film normalized cruelty and traded on urban legends about actual snuff films. Officials in Santa Clara, Philadelphia, and St. Paul ordered theaters to cease showings. In Rochester, demonstrators smashed a lobby poster case, leading to arrests. One theater owner faced obscenity charges just for exhibiting it. The controversy created a media circus that made this otherwise forgettable film legendary. Talk shows debated its existence. Newspapers ran editorials about society's moral collapse, and midnight screenings sold out as audiences scrambled to see what the fuss was about. Film scholar David Carriquez later noted, "Snuff created the perfect storm: moral panic, clever marketing, and America's growing obsession with media violence." The film was pulled from numerous theaters under pressure, which only increased its notoriety. Today, snuff stands as a cautionary tale in horror history. Once you invite the myth of reality into your marketing, you might discover the real terror isn't on the screen. It's waiting in the lobby with picket signs and police badges, forcing the projector to go dark. 4. Last House on the Left, in 1972. Wes Craven's directorial debut wasn't just testing boundaries, it was napalming them. Shot on a shoestring budget, Last House reimagined Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, but stripped away all artistic pretense, replacing it with raw, relentless brutality. The marketing tagline, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie," wasn't hyperbole, it was a warning. Controversy erupted instantly. Theaters pulled it after single weekends following mass walkouts and furious complaint letters. The UK's censors refused certification entirely, leading to decades of prohibition under the infamous Video Nasties list. Even heavily edited versions were rejected. Australian censorship boards demanded so many cuts that distribution became impractical. Critics couldn't agree whether Craven had created art or abomination. Roger Ebert praised its powerful impact, while others dismissed it as moral collapse on film. For audiences, it was an endurance test. Craven insisted the film was an anti-violence statement, forcing viewers to confront true horror rather than glamorized versions. What made Last House especially disturbing wasn't the villains. It was watching ordinary parents become just as monstrous in their revenge. This wasn't escapism. It was a mirror held up to the ugliest human impulses. Its pulling from theaters didn't kill it. It made it immortal. For decades, horror fans traded contraband copies like samizdat literature, each generation discovering anew why some films were considered too disturbing to show. 5. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pure. Paolo Pasolini's Salo isn't just a horror film, it's cinema's most unflinching dive into human depravity. Adapted from the Marquis de Sade's notorious novel and set during the dying days of Mussolini's regime, it blends political allegory with extreme degradation that governments worldwide deemed unacceptable. Upon release, Italy banned it outright. Prints were seized, and Pasolini faced obscenity charges before his murder shortly before the film's premiere. In the UK, it remained unreleased for decades, surfacing only in heavily cut editions after lengthy legal battles. Australia refused classification, while New Zealand placed it on its prohibited publications list. What made Salo so radioactive wasn't just its imagery, but its implication that fascism's worst crimes could be enacted in private rooms under the guise of ritualized order. The film suggests that the true horror of totalitarianism isn't just in battlefields, but in the methodical destruction of human dignity. Critic Roger Ebert called it one of the most disturbing films ever made, while Pasolini defended it as necessary. To show the unshowable is sometimes the only way to make people understand what must never happen again. Theaters that pulled Salo weren't just protecting audiences from disturbing content, they were avoiding confrontation with history's darkest reflections. Today, the film is studied in universities as much as it's condemned, a disturbing reminder that some works are banned not just for what they show, but for what they dare to suggest about human nature and power. 6. Mark of the Devil, 1970. Michael Armstrong's witch-hunting horror declared war on audience stomachs from the very beginning, marketed with the slogan, "Guaranteed to upset your stomach," and accompanied by free vomit bags for theater patrons. The film dove headfirst into the grim world of 18th century torture, portrayed in stomach-turning detail. In the UK, distributors faced immediate pushback, with local councils banning it outright in several towns. West Germany heavily censored the film, trimming some of its most infamous moments before release. In America, Mark of the Devil was yanked from select theaters after public complaints, with one New Jersey town forcing it out after just a few days of screenings. What made it particularly disturbing was its unflinching depiction of torture methods actually used during the witch trial era, tongue ripping, water torture, and burning alive, all presented as entertainment. Herbert Lom, who played the conflicted witch hunter, later admitted, "I knew it would be controversial, but even I was shocked by the final cut." Critics dismissed it as gratuitous exploitation, but audiences, particularly in grindhouse circuits, embraced its shameless excess. The controversy transformed it into a badge of honor for horror completists, an endurance test to prove one's mettle. Filmmaker Jörg Buttgereit called it the film that taught a generation about historical cruelty through shock value. Today it's remembered as one of the decade's most lurid exercises in shock marketing, where the legend of its bans became inseparable from the film itself. 7. Don't Go in the House, 1979. Joseph Ellison's deeply disturbing psychodrama about a disturbed man who burns women alive in a steel-lined room was practically designed to enrage censors. Shot with clinical coldness, the film unsettled not through fast-paced gore, but with an unblinking lens on trauma, isolation, and revenge. In the United Kingdom, it joined the ranks of the video Nasties, banned under the Obscene Publications Act. Ireland refused classification outright. Even in America, several states pushed for edits before allowing screenings. The controversy centered on one particularly graphic immolation scene that many found indefensible. Critics largely condemned it. Variety called it repulsive even by horror standards, while others labeled it sadistic. Defenders, however, argued it was a psychological study exploring the making of a monster. The main character, Donnie, was abused by his mother, who burned him as punishment. The theater run was spotty at best. Some cinemas pulled it midweek after bad press, fearing community backlash. Director Joseph Ellison was bewildered by the reaction. We were trying to show how abuse creates monsters, not glorify violence. The system missed the point entirely. In the underground video market, though, it found a dedicated audience. Ironically, without the bans and headlines, Don't Go in the House might have faded into obscurity. Instead, it endures as one of the most chilling grindhouse tales of the era, proof that sometimes being pulled from theaters can cement a film's legacy as effectively as a blockbuster run. 8. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. When Wes Craven followed Last House on the Left with The Hills Have Eyes, he traded suburban terror for sun-blasted desert nightmare. The film's tale of a family ambushed by a feral clan in the Nevada wilderness wasn't just disturbing. It struck deep nerves about societal collapse and survivalism in post-Vietnam America. Shot on a minuscule budget in punishing conditions, it combined documentary-like rawness with shocking violence. In the UK, censors demanded extensive cuts before release. Even then, local councils in certain regions refused to screen it. It was later swept into the video Nasties panic of the early 80s, with prosecutors using its disturbing imagery as evidence of public harm. Australia imposed strict censorship, leading to heavily truncated versions. In America, some theaters pulled it after audience complaints, particularly in conservative areas. What particularly disturbed viewers was the film's implication that civilized people are just one crisis away from savagery, a theme that hit too close to home. Craven defended the film, saying, "I wanted to show that the line between civilization and barbarism is thinner than we think." His knack for balancing brutality with social commentary turned the bans into free publicity, cementing The Hills Have Eyes as essential survival horror. Film historian Adam Lowenstein noted, "The Hills Have Eyes showed that American wilderness horror wasn't just about external threats, but about the monster within the nuclear family." Over time, its status shifted from dangerous contraband to celebrated classic, proving that suppression can sometimes immortalize what it seeks to erase. 9. The House on Straw Hill, 1976. Also released under the titles Exposé and Trauma to skirt censorship boards, The House on Straw Hill blended psychological horror with exploitation elements to tell the story of a reclusive author spiraling into paranoia and violence. Its uneasy mix of art house pacing and sudden brutal violence made it a prime target for moral watchdogs. In the United Kingdom, the film was placed on the infamous Video Nasties list and effectively banned for years under the Obscene Publications Act. Even before the home video panic, certain local authorities refused to grant it theatrical licenses, citing its corrosive impact on community standards. Australia followed suit with outright bans, and New Zealand's film board prohibited it entirely. The film's director, James Kinnom Clark, protested, "They weren't banning the film. They were banning ideas they didn't want to confront. While critics were generally hostile, some noted its atmospheric tension and experimental style, hinting that it aspired to more than exploitation. Director Nicholas Roeg reportedly defended the film, calling it uncomfortable but necessary viewing. Though this did little to sway censors, the film's pulling from theaters ensured its fate as a collector's item, whispered about in fan circles and sold in bootleg markets for exorbitant prices. Star Udo Kier later reflected, "Sometimes the most interesting films are the ones society tries hardest to hide." In hindsight, The House on Straw Hill illustrates how films on the fringe, too unconventional for mainstream success, sometimes achieve lasting fame precisely because they're driven underground. 10. The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. From the title alone, audiences might have expected a supernatural chiller. Instead, The Witch Who Came from the Sea delivered something far more unsettling. A psychological descent into trauma, madness, and violent fantasy. Directed by Matt Cimber, the film follows a woman haunted by disturbing visions, with her delusions spilling into brutal acts. In the United Kingdom, the BBFC refused certification, placing it firmly on the Video Nasties list. This meant it was effectively banned from legal distribution for years, surviving only in heavily edited imports and underground VHS swaps. The controversy was heightened by its misleading marketing, which promised ocean-bound witchcraft, but delivered a disturbing character study. In America, while never formally banned, some theaters canceled bookings after early audience walkouts and critical backlash. What particularly disturbed censors were scenes involving castration, though the film's examination of child abuse and trauma was equally provocative. Star Millie Perkins defended the film, saying, "It wasn't exploitation. It was an honest look at how trauma destroys lives. That's what scared people." Director Matt Cimber later noted the irony. "We made a film about how abuse victims are silenced, and then the film itself was silenced." For years, it remained infamous more for its absence than its availability. Modern critics have since reevaluated it as a strange, unsettling piece of 70s cinema that was ahead of its time in addressing trauma's psychological aftermath. Its removal from theaters gave it the aura of a cursed object, a film that, once unseen, only became more powerful in the imagination. 11. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. Joel M. Reed's Blood-Sucking Freaks wasn't designed to be subtle. Set in a depraved off-Broadway theater where the line between performance and cruelty collapses entirely, the film made itself an easy target for moral outrage from its first screening. From the moment it hit grindhouse screens in New York under its original title, The Incredible Torture Show, protesters, particularly women's rights groups, organized pickets, demanding theaters drop it. In Philadelphia, police raided a screening, seizing reels as evidence of obscenity. The title was eventually pulled from several U.S. theaters under public pressure. Overseas, the UK refused classification entirely, and other countries like Australia and New Zealand followed with outright bans. Trauma Entertainment founder Lloyd Kaufman, who later distributed the film, admitted, "Even we thought it pushed boundaries too far, and that's saying something." Critics widely condemned it. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it a film that makes you fear for the future of humanity. But among exploitation fans, the film's notoriety became its main selling point. It played sporadically at midnight screenings for years, trading on its banned status to draw curious crowds. The combination of low-budget shock tactics, unapologetic excess, and a deliberate dare to censors made Blood-Sucking Freaks one of the most enduring too-far titles of the decade. Director Joel Reed remained unrepentant. "I made exactly the film I wanted to make. If society couldn't handle it, that's society's problem." 12. House of Whipcord, 1974. Pete Walker's House of Whipcord occupies a strange intersection between British social commentary and sadistic horror. On its surface, it's a grim morality tale about a young woman lured into a private prison run by a retired judge and his sadistic partner. Beneath that, it's a scathing critique of authoritarianism and moral hypocrisy. Unfortunately for Walker, many censors only saw the cruelty, not the commentary. In the UK, some local councils refused to book the film, while others allowed only heavily cut versions to screen. In New Zealand and parts of Australia, it was denied classification entirely. Critics were split. Some dismissed it as exploitation dressed up as social critique, while others recognized it as part of Walker's larger pattern of pushing against moral conservatism. The Monthly Film Bulletin called it a film of ideas masquerading as a film of shocks, while more conservative outlets labeled it depraved. Walker himself was unapologetic. I wasn't making a skin flick. I was making a film about how punishment becomes perverted when it's divorced from justice. The bans only added to its mystique, making it a sought-after title among British horror collectors. Over the years, its reputation has shifted. What was once dismissed as pulp is now often read as a sharp, if grim, satire on how societies justify cruelty under the guise of justice. Film historian David McGillivray noted, House of Whipcord was pulled from theaters because it showed British authority figures as monsters. That was the real obscenity. In pulling it from theaters, authorities may have inadvertently amplified its message, ensuring that audiences would seek it out for decades to come. 13. Flesh for Frankenstein, 1973, also known as Andy Warhol's Frankenstein. In some territories, Paul Morrissey's Flesh for Frankenstein was never intended for polite audiences. A grotesque, surreal spin on Mary Shelley's tale, it blended camp, art house stylings, and moments of extreme gore into a fever dream that baffled mainstream critics and delighted cult audiences. Released in 3D in some markets, its confrontational tone and grotesque humor clashed with the standards of the day. In the United Kingdom, it faced immediate scrutiny with several local councils refusing to grant licenses for theatrical screenings. Australia banned it outright, and Italy demanded severe cuts before release. Even in the United States, certain states pulled it after only a few days of play, citing complaints about its depravity. The controversy was stoked further by Morrissey's own public statements, which leaned into the outrage rather than softening it. When asked about the explicit content, he famously replied, "If you don't like liver, don't eat it." Star Udo Kier defended the film's excesses. "We weren't making pornography, we were making a satire about obsession." Critics were polarized. Some saw genius in its excess, others only depravity. The New York Times called it garbage, while European critics praised its subversive qualities. Over time, Flesh for Frankenstein has been reevaluated by scholars as a dark satire on both the horror genre and the social politics of the early 70s. At the time, however, the bans and removals gave it the air of something forbidden, something you had to know the right theater or the right bootleg dealer to see. Like many films on this list, its pulling from theaters only deepened its cult appeal, ensuring it lived on far beyond its original troubled run. The 70s weren't just a golden age for horror. They were a battleground where art and morality collided in theater lobbies worldwide. Each banned screening, each pulled print, each moral panic only intensified our fascination with these forbidden films. Today, most are available uncut on streaming services, their power to shock somewhat diminished by time and changing standards. But the question remains, were these films truly dangerous, or was the real danger in trying to suppress them? Let us know in the comments which of these banned classics still packs a punch, or if there's another pulled film we missed. Because sometimes, what society tries hardest to hide tells us the most about ourselves.